it's been a long time since we've done a movie review, and so we're back to do a movie review. What was the last one we did? Was it the Netflix thing, or was it that one about the Polish air squadron in the Battle of Britain? Which one was the last one we did?
I think the Netflix one was
1983. That was a long time ago. Well, we're back with a film. The film is The film is 5 years old, from 2014, and recently added to Netflix. Although strangely and unfortunately with no subtitles, you can watch it if you like to share, if you know what I mean, and I think you do.
If you sail the seas,
it's very easy to it's very easy to find this film
with a Jolly Roger flying in.
Very easy to find this film online with subtitles. It's called Bogowie, or The Gods. And Dr. Mike, it's interesting for a few reasons. It's based on a true story and real people, and the story centers on a very interesting chapter of Polish medical history.
Yes, this is all around the formation of the cardiac department and the first heart transplants in Poland, led by Zbigniew Religa, professor, doctor of medicine, who in Poland was, one of the most popular medical personalities that have ever existed. He's considered, a god, hence the title of the movie. And he pushed very hard for transplants to take part to occur in Poland, and he headed
specifically heart transplants.
Heart transplants, yes, and he headed the first teams that the first teams that attempted this was actually 20 years earlier, in 1969, just a few years after the first successful transplant in South Africa. But then in Poland, really didn't push forward until the 80s with Religa, who decided, look, we can do this. This can happen. We can make this work. And there didn't start off, ideally right away. There was a lot of pushback from the medical field here. They weren't sure it could be done. They didn't want it done, but he, pushed forward. He brought in people from all over the country, and one of his the other doctors involved, Bohemek, he actually was studying and working in England as a doctor, and he heard that Religa, or the UK, Religa was putting a team together that they were going to attempt transplants. He came back to Poland and joined him in Zabrze. Religa was actually from Warsaw, but the clinic that he headed that actually became famous for the transplant is in Zabrze in Śląsk.
I think we're going to end up talking about the real life events more than the movie, even though this is a movie review. That's okay. We'll save the movie for after we kind of set up the story here. Oh, and by the way, obviously, tons and tons of spoilers. But anyway, so he starts off. As you say, just a few years after the first transplant in South Africa, but he didn't really get close to success until 85 or 86, yeah.
Well, now hold on, because it wasn't Religa who was doing the attempting transplants in the 60s.
Well, sorry, I mean the community of doctors that were focused on transplants. But Zbigniew Religa, around 85, he gets his first kind of success.
Well, because these details are always presented, in pop culture in different ways. But basically, the first successful operation where the patient, survived the actual procedure and the heart started pumping was in 85. And it's kind of funny because I tried to get in touch with some cardiology friends here, just didn't have time before this to find out what the details are, because when I'm looking this up, some were saying that the patient died within a few days, others within a few months.
They're different patients.
That's the thing, how these, sometimes the media, because a lot of these sources that I tried to look up were medical sources, but were just news articles using other articles as sources. And this is where I got a little annoyed, because I want to present things like this that seem simple as factual. But we know that in 85 was definitely the first operation where somebody survived, and they lived
for an indeterminate period of time. Yeah.
And but by 86 they were having multiple patients surviving and living extended periods of times, at least longer than they would have had they not had the operation done earlier. You have to understand, like a heart transplant, even though the first ones were 20 years earlier, we were still in the first generation of doctors being trained and then spreading this knowledge around the world to other doctors, because these kind of skills that you can't just pick up a pamphlet and learn it. You have to be first a very talented cardiosurgeon to begin with, and the best way is to be taught by somebody else who's already done that. But there weren't that many doctors who could perform these surgeries to actually teach other doctors.
And of course, unfortunately and tragically for many people involved, that necessarily means making mistakes along the way and having unsuccessful procedures.
Yes, but usually these are the kind of patients that there's no chance of them surviving at all or very slim. So, having this procedure, which may give them a chance to survive, even if it's only 5%.
So Dr. Religa finally gets it right, so to speak, in 87 with a patient named, what was his name again?
Tadeusz Zytkiewicz. Well, actually, this was one of the more famous patients this was at the moment when they were starting to get these procedures done, I wouldn't say routinely, but they were becoming very successful, and there was a whole group of patients. But this patient, he was about in his mid-50s when his procedure was done. A lot of people said he was already too old. He'd had his first heart attack about 15 years earlier, it was 17 years earlier, in 1970. He was a teacher. Then he had a second heart attack. Then he was told, your heart is weak. There's nothing we can do about that. You just, rest, here's some medication. And he actually, they said
Sorry, I just dropped my pen. Sorry about that.
And he basically was told, you're too old for a transplant. So he actually wrote to Religa, and Religa said, just come down here to Zabrze. He came to Zabrze. Religa, tested him, okay, you're healthy enough. Basically, if your kidneys are working, your liver is working, we can go ahead and try this. Just go back home and wait for the phone call. He waited about 6 months for the phone call. His wife actually picked up the phone while he was out for a walk. They drove out, got him to the airport. He was flown. He was supposed to fly to Katowice directly, but he got flown to Krakow. Then he got helicoptered over to Zabrze to Katowice. And then the procedure was done. Actually, 2 procedures done that day. He was the one that was successful that day. And this is also the procedure which has that famous photo.
National Geographic, yes. 1987, their photo of the year.
It's Religa sitting down, exhausted, looking off to the side. Some people say looking at a cardiac monitor, but it would be kind of in a weird position compared to where the patient is in the background. You can see the patient, can't see the face, but it's been basically strongly suggested that it was actually Tadeusz Zytkiewicz. And on the ground behind that is the assistant doctor, basically passed out. Yes. These operations could take
23-hour operations.
Exactly. You have different people coming in different moments, but basically you're on.
We'll put a link to that famous photograph when we post the show on Facebook. And by the way, this recipient of that successful procedure, he lived until about 2-3 years ago. Did he not?
Yeah, he lived till I think 2017. So he lived 30 years. He outlived Religa by about 10 years, 8 years. And also I should mention that this man also, because when you have a transplant, you need to take medication. So this is that suppresses your immune system to prevent rejection of these organs by your body. And they kind of do a number on your liver and your kidneys, and his kidneys was basically destroyed by the late 90s. He was on dialysis, but he also got on the transplant list and had kidneys transplant
Heart and kidney transplant recipient.
So this was a guy that kind of, I didn't know any of this beforehand. I've seen the film, but this wasn't really part of the film.
And by the way, we will talk about the film in just a minute, I promise.
Yes, I'm intending to do that. But so this was a guy that, you said he was in his mid-50s and he had his first heart attack some 17 years previously. So this was a man who had a heart attack in his late 30s. This is not a healthy person we're talking about. Post-transplant and kidneys as well, he manages to make it presumably into, I guess, his
late 80s. Yeah,
his late 80s. That is
that's amazing.
It is.
This is because usually people don't understand. When you get a transplant of any organ, it isn't for life. Sometimes it will work for 2-3 years. Sometimes 30 years. Sometimes, especially with younger people who get kidneys, it's something that you're going to have every couple of years because your body eventually rejects them. It's just a question of how much time.
Before we move on to the last chapter of Religa's life, Dr. Mike, and again, just a reminder for the listeners, he is actually a doctor. Give us kind of the short bullet point version. It seems like an obvious point, but tell us what makes the heart transplant procedure such a major surgery, so difficult for doctors, and give us an idea of all the many things that can go wrong.
Okay, there's a lot of things go wrong, generally for operations.
Like I said, bullet point version.
Yeah, but first of all, your blood, center of the cardiovascular system, cardio, keeps the blood pumping through your body to keep your body oxygenated and supplied while getting rid of all the muck that your body produces. So the blood needs to keep pumping all the time. But with a transplant, you're taking the heart out and putting in a new one. So there's no pumping going along. So what happens is your cardiovascular system has to actually be connected to external machinery, which keeps the blood flowing, keeps it oxygenated, and goes back to your body. But what happens, though, the blood, when it's going through this turbulent system, has a tendency to want to clot. And you definitely do not want clots getting into the machine, then going back to the patient and, causing a stroke, clot, an embolism, or somewhere else in the body. So you need medication to prevent clotting. But when you have medication to prevent clotting, that also increases the chances of internal bleeding, or, when you're cutting up a patient during an operation, then that won't heal in an amount of time. So it's a balancing act. When you have so many vessels opened up as well, it increases the chances of infections and sepsis after the operation. And of course, just getting the heart started, the body oxygenated after the operation, that's also difficult. There's just so many things that could go wrong just because it's a major cardiological operation. And then, of course, everything else associated with an operation as well. So infections, post-operative infections, other complications that you aren't prepared for. And
what about these drugs you mentioned earlier, these drugs that suppress the immune system to kind of, force the body to accept the organ? In 1985, 86, 87, Poland, these drugs presumably were not as advanced and not as available as they are now.
Exactly, and there weren't so many of them, and nobody knew exactly how many you had to take. For a while, like in the late '80s, when there were the first patients walking the streets, nobody knew what to do with them. A lot of times, they were put on the list of invalids, of handicapped people. You were on the same list. You weren't allowed to work or anything like this. The famous patient Zytkevich, he actually had to go and demand, "I want to keep being a teacher," because they didn't know what to do with these patients, and the medication was limited. You had to take a lot of it, and it damages your liver and your kidney, as we had in the case of the famous patient where his kidneys were basically screwed over and he had to get new ones.
These are very strong drugs.
Yes, and not only do they damage the body, they're also been associated with causing cancer, numerous cancers themselves. So it's kind of funny, ironic, when patients that have something transplanted or removed because of cancer then have to take immunosuppressive drugs that can cause cancer as well.
All right, let's go back to Religa. So he pulls off the successful transplant surgery in 1987. And after that, he kind of focuses on his career as an academic and as a kind of a research teacher. He becomes a professor. And slowly, he kind of transitions to the world of politics and reaches a surprisingly high position.
Yes, actually, he already started in the 80s and the early 90s. He was associated actually with ONR, the Odrodzenie Narodowe Polski kind of party, kind of a quasi-nationalistic. It's become a little more of a taboo group now, especially since it's not the same thing that was 30 years ago. But it was generally associated with a lot of center-right parties.
And he was connected with the Kaczynskis pretty early on.
Yes. He was actually, backed Wałęsa, and his one of the parties he formed in the early 90s backed Wałęsa, but then that party broke apart and the people that kind of revolted against Wałęsa formed another party with Religa against Wałęsa. Everybody was for and against Wałęsa there in the beginning. Then he joined another party, ran for Senate, ran for Sejm, but at the same time, he was also involved, like you said, in the academic world, becoming a professor, the head of the of the center in Katowice. It was also head up in Warsaw. He was lecturing all over the place. He was doing a lot of things.
And there was a time in 2005 when it looked like he had a very, very good shot at becoming the president of Poland.
Right at the beginning, he was one of the first people to say that he would campaign. He was extremely popular. It looked like he would almost win. He was second place behind Kaczynski at that point. But as more and more politicians started to get involved, he pulled back and finally resigned. And he said, anybody wanted to vote for me, support Tusk. And and Tusk, didn't win the presidency, then Kaczynski. But what happened when Marcinkiewicz and Kaczynski, the Jarosław, formed their government? They brought in Religa to be their minister of health. I mean, this person was
Makes
loved.
Sense.
He was loved and supported by so many people on all sides of the spectrum that the fact that he had actually run against Kaczynski and actually supported Tusk during this was still okay enough for him to be, brought in.
Because they were all friends.
Yeah, they were all friends, yes. The thing is, Zbigniew Religa, he brought in some major changes. First of all, he wanted to increase the payments into the health system to 13% of taxes. Now there are people protesting it up to 6%. He also...
I'm going to tax you people back to the Stone Age.
And you'll be healthier for it.
Worst political platform ever.
He also introduced a tax that was called Podatek Religa, which basically said that insurance companies...
Oh, wait. When you have a tax named after you, you might as well just quit
Because basically 12% of what car insurance companies collected from people had to go towards paying for accident victims. After 2 years, this tax was pulled out.
I feel like we should move towards the movie review part of this movie review. Just quickly, really good. Actually, what year did he pass away again? Sorry, I forgot.
I forget, it was 2008 or 9.
Yeah, I think 2009.
And he dies of lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker. Dr. Mike, I've always been struck, maybe not today, but certainly 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was always struck by how many Polish doctors smoked.
During operations, for Christ's sakes. I mean, there was one famous professor here in Krakow, in Kopernika, who, even though like now in the 2000s it was already not allowed to smoke, he'd walk around with a pipe.
Like, whatever.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, you're going to fire me, screw you. So there was like that tobacco scent.
Yeah, there's just some irony there. The doctor that did so much to advance healthcare and, heart transplants. I mean, my God.
And in the 70s and 80s, he self-admitted to be a heavy drinker in that time as well.
Even better.
So, he was treated once for lung cancer. He had part of his lung removed, a tumor removed. And then there was a second metastasis, and there was chemotherapy, a couple of rounds of that, more operations. But
all right, so we've got the basis for what sounds like a pretty good story for a movie, right? Guess what? They made a movie, Bogowie, with Tomasz Kot. Tomasz Kot is an actor. Josh, how can we introduce and kind of describe Tomasz Kot?
Because I actually did some preparation for this.
Ooh,
I have
serious,
like 6 words written down on a piece of paper. Tomasz Kot, who is one of, I would say, he's in the A list of kind of like Polish screen actors.
Yeah, for
he
sure.
was in that film Cold War, which was 3 times Oscar nominated.
My favorite movie, Disco Polo, actually. I like that movie.
No, I've not seen that one.
You haven't missed much, but I liked it.
Okay, so Tomasz Kot, which kind of his name translates as Tom Cat. I think.
Nice.
Yes. Like a very, very tall, skinny man, a long, lanky streak of piss, I think would be what an English person might describe him as. And I thought he was superbly cast as a Dr. Religer. Everywhere he went, a cloud of cigarette smoke, kind of like overalls flapping behind him. It was a very, very good film. It particularly did a good job, I thought, of recreating early 80s, still under communism Poland, without over-labouring the point, really. The scenery, the
world is believable, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. There was, I mean, you got kind of hints here and there of kind of the grinding bureaucracy that would sometimes be, impossible to deal with. But it wasn't. The point wasn't laboured, really. It was really, everyone was like desperately trying to, these like kind of slow motion car chases because they're all driving like Fiat 125s.
Right. Very slow motion here. I think the film also does a good job of kind of getting you as a viewer, getting you kind of emotionally invested in his quest, not only dealing with bureaucracy, but dealing with, triumphs and tragedies on the operating table as well. You want him to succeed. Even though you know the true story behind it, you know what's going to happen, it still gets you invested.
But I'm going to interrupt because I almost deliberately, I didn't bother to find out the true story behind it all before watching the film. So I was, in as much as I kind of knew the basis of the story, as everyone listening already does now. And I thought that it was, I mean, I don't know how truthful it is, but the way in which the story unfolds would suggest to me that it is probably pretty truthful, because if you were going to take liberties with the truth, they were kind of obvious things that you could have done that didn't take place, and that in fact, when he does the first operation. In fact, this was interesting. We were talking about it just now. We had kind of conflicting reports of how long the first survivor survived. Well, I think the first time he did the operation, they didn't survive at all. So that's presumably wasn't considered a successful operation. Sorry for the involuntary laughter there. But it did seem, as it unfolded in the film, that the first successful operation was successful for a matter of days or possibly weeks, and then the second one lasted a little bit longer, and then the third one, and then it wasn't until maybe the very famous national.
You can kind of feel them moving towards success, step by step. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there was a good sense of, this was, that he was some kind of an egotist. He was a man on a mission. He was not by any means a saint.
There's some depth to the character, definitely. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, you really, I have to say, it's a tremendously good film, and it doesn't shy away from the gory details. Actually, I mean, you do get to see up and close and personal, kind of the beating heart of the.
Something I liked about this film, and I noticed this a lot in Polish productions, is that they have very good supporting characters. Very good minor characters. The lead can be hit or miss, just like anywhere. Sometimes the lead actor pulls it off, sometimes he doesn't, sometimes he's believable, sometimes he isn't. But most Polish films have a very deep bench of again supporting characters, and they're not overacting. That's the word I'm looking for. That's my biggest criticism of lead actors and actresses sometimes, is that they overact, whereas supporting characters generally are spot on.
Did you a bit of trivia for you here? I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Religa's two real-life assistants, Bochenek and was it Zabala or something like that?
Yeah.
They actually have cameo roles in the film as members of the Ministry of Health, because obviously they're like 20, 30 years older than they actually were at the time.
Oh, by the way,
also became a minister of health, yeah.
Going back to smoking for a second, in the movie, everybody's smoking all the time, pretty much. Two-fisted, I think, as I recall. There is, as you say,
ashing
a haze
in the chest cavity.
A haze of smoke at all times.
Yeah. It's a film with a lot of heart, I think you can say.
I think a quick word about Tomasz Kot. I agree with you. I think he's very good. But at the same time, though, and this is not his fault, I guess, you see that there's something I've noticed in the Polish film industry, is that when an actor or an actress, but usually an actor, when they hit it big, suddenly they are very much in demand and they're everywhere. If you were in Poland about 20 years ago, you can remember a time when it was like there was a law that said that Cezary Pazury had to be in every movie.
Because and Bogusław Linda as well.
And Bogusław Linda. I mean, if there was a comedy, you could be sure that Pazury was the lead role every goddamn time. And Bogusław Linda was like the Bruce Willis, the tough guy of whatever. And I mean, I guess I get it from a commercial perspective. If you're the producer of a movie, obviously you want somebody who's, going to get a reaction from the ticket buying public. But this seems to be Kot's time. And I had to look at his Wikipedia page. He's been in like 700 movies in the last 5 years. Slight exaggeration, but it's ridiculous. And when you add television productions on top of that, and you add, a lot of Polish actors, when they hit the big time, they appear in, their voices appear in a lot of these Hollywood animated productions, about animals usually. And it's this overexposure, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. Just too much Tomasz Kot too quickly.
Oh, just about actors who played Religa. Do you know that apparently Religa played himself in a TV show here as well? I think it was Na Dobre i Na Złe. He played a cardiosurgeon himself.
Like a cameo.
But like in dozens of episodes. This is like a daytime TV show.
It's like a soap opera.
Yeah, it's a soap opera thing.
Okay, that's weird. The guy's talented, though. He was talented. You got to give it to him. I mean, heart surgeon and politician and actor. That's a pretty impressive resume. Like a god, almost, I guess you could say, right?
Oh.
Yeah, well, okay, maybe not.
I was thinking of the soundtrack, and all of the songs that they could have had, like A Good Heart Is Hard to Find, or Two Hearts Beat as One, or Give Me Back My Heart.
Too easy.
Dollar.
Too easy. On that subject, though, just quickly, Josh, because I don't recall being struck by the soundtrack of this movie either way. Maybe it was too subtle, or I wasn't paying attention, or maybe it just wasn't there. But as a musician and as a music guy yourself, can you give us a quick word about Polish movie soundtracks?
Well, no, not really.
Okay, never mind. Thanks for listening. Bye.
I would say, actually, that the soundtrack for this one I thought was pretty good, in the sense that they were quite a lot of like hits from the 80s that were like worldwide hits, right? They were like, lyrics in English, either American or UK.
Part of setting the atmosphere, setting the time.
Yeah, and I thought that was, probably a fair amount of the budget went on that.
Licensing those songs,
yeah.
We're going to fair use? I don't know.
So, bottom line, Josh, you've already said Bogowie, you're very impressed by the film. You give it 2 thumbs up, I guess, Dr. Mike?
Yeah, 2 thumbs up. Sorry, I tried to think of like a medical analogy. I couldn't think of
2 transplanted thumbs up. Yeah, it is very good. Well worth a look for sure. Like I said, it's on Netflix. No subtitles. If you need them, go to some sharing site and get them. It's not hard to find at all. You will enjoy it for sure. Excellent look into not only a fascinating chapter of Polish medical history, but also just recreating that world of early mid 80s in Poland. Very, very well done. So we agree, Bogowie, definitely worth a look. Okay, thanks, guys. That's our movie review of Gods, and we'll see you on our next movie review, I don't know, 3, 4, 6 months from now. Something interesting
When we
comes up.
feel like it.
No idea. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you next time on the KrakCast.